Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We'll just give everyone another few minutes and then we'll get started. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on how to use a requirements traceability matrix to improve your project quality. My name is Ambreen, and I'm a marketing consultant here at Modern Requirements, as well as your host for today. If you have been tuning into this deep dive series, you're likely quite familiar with our speakers and format. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we have our SVP of Sales and Marketing at Modern Requirements, Bob Savelson, who will provide us with an introduction to Modern Requirements for DevOps, as well as Asif Sharif, our Chief Technologist, who will do a deeper dive into the traceability matrix and how to leverage it to improve your project quality. At the end, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So please drop any questions you may have in the question window on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try to cover them either during or after the presentation. After the webinar, if you are interested in a free 30-day trial of Modern Requirements, please visit the link on the screen at modernrequirements.com/try-now. Our next webinar will be held on July 29th at the same time, covering the topic of reporting, particularly smart reports and advanced reporting. To register, you can visit our website or stay tuned for our email invites going out tomorrow. I also wanted to take a moment to let you know that we have uploaded all of our webinar recordings to our website. If you just navigate to the resources section under the Help Center and scroll down, you'll see all of our deep dive webinars that we've been running listed on our website, and we don't gate any of this content, so feel free to go back and watch any of the ones that you may have missed, or if you just want to refer to them again, they can be found here. And on the note as well, after the webinar wraps, we will send an email with the video recording. So if you can't make it for the whole duration of this, no problem. We will send out the email and it will also be uploaded to this section of the website. And just lastly, before I hand it over to Bob, we have also included a quick feedback survey, which will appear once the webinar has ended. For all of you that have completed that, it has been very helpful. All of the topics that you've suggested are ones that we are planning to cover, and it really helps us improve these webinars for you going forward. All right, over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Ambreen, and good day, everyone. Nice to see a lot of familiar names in the webinar on both sides of the pond. So welcome and thanks again for your interest. I'd like to do a little bit of an introduction of our company for those of you that are new to our webinar series. Modern Requirements has been serving the requirements needs of clients since 1999, and we are Microsoft's go-to requirements partner, as our solution is built into their Azure DevOps platform. Modern Requirements for DevOps is a browser-based solution. It can be installed on a server on your site, or it can be installed and run completely in the cloud. We use Microsoft's Azure DevOps as the application server and database. So you have a single source of truth, and everything that you create in our tool is stored natively in Azure DevOps. The tool inherits whatever process template you're using in Azure DevOps, whether it's customized or out of the box, and it supports single sign-in. The tool provides clients with many layers of functionality to address many issues that clients have shared with us in their requirements process. And today we are going to be focusing on the auditability layer, and particularly trace analysis within that layer. The tool offers considerable amount of quality management reporting, and we are supporting a growing number of industry standards, ISO standards for quality, risk, and so forth, and have added some calculation capabilities to the work items so that you can produce charts like the risks and hazards chart that's on this slide. To introduce the topic a little bit, as you complete your projects or are moving towards the end of your projects, there are a number of questions that you would ask yourself, or your peers or your management may ask you, and they generally center around two topics. Are your requirements complete? And are they of high quality? And there are a variety of questions, all of which can be answered very easily by generating trace matrices in our tool in a matter of seconds. Now, trace analysis is not only applicable to requirements engineers, but certainly can be used and is essential for many other roles, including project managers, QA people within your project lifecycle. And it really does apply to any methodology that you're following to ensure completeness and high quality of your requirements. And we'll show you how it works and how easy it is to generate trace matrices as we go through the demonstration. So like trace analysis being applicable to many different roles, the tool itself provides value across the enterprise for product and project management. So many different roles within your company can leverage various aspects of the tool and derive value in doing so. So at this point, we'd like to get to know your situation a little bit more clearly surrounding trace analysis, and I will turn this over to Asif, who will conduct some polling questions so we can get your input and then better present our trace analysis capabilities based on what we learn collectively in that. So Asif, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. And hey, folks, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you're joining us from the other side of the world. So here's the first question on the poll. Do you currently use traceability? That is really to say, do you generate traceability matrices either manually or automatically using a tool? So we have About 60% of the people are saying yes, they do. This the second question we have here is, do you produce traceability reporting on projects for regulatory reasons? So you support, say, you have to report to FDA or SOX compliance or some sort of a reporting need, as opposed to internal quality process. So about 40% are doing it for that. All right. Let's go to the next question. And this question is, how much time do you spend on average in maintaining your reporting, traceability reporting for a given project on average? So about half the people are, or 40% is spending up to 10 hours per project. But then again, you have about 30% that spend up to 20 hours and another 30% that spend up to 30 hours. So yeah, it's sort of a split between all three levels. All right. So the last question is, do you find requirements or test cases are missing because you have not done coverage? So you haven't used tools to help identify where the gaps are, and because you don't do traceability, do you find after the fact that something got missed? Yeah, so the answers really are that about a third of the people find it all the time, 2/3 find it sometimes, and very few people said not at all. So obviously that simply signifies the importance of doing trace analysis. So with that, let's all right, so I'm going to share my screen with you now. Ambi, can you make me the presenter, please?
I should already be.
Yeah, no, it doesn't let me share yet. Oh. Yeah, no, actually I had to close the poll in order to share. All right, my bad. All right, guys, excellent. So let's do this here. So traceability matrix. Now, as most of you know, that modern requirements for DevOps is built into and for Azure DevOps, and everything here from smart docs to reporting are all part of modern requirements. Trace analysis is one of the capabilities of modern requirements. And it's important to note that not only do we inherit the security from Azure DevOps, but we also inherit the process template. So if you've created new work item types, it'll show up in modern requirements. So what would a trace matrix look like? So I've created a few that I would walk you through and show you how to configure different types of trace matrices. But to begin with, let's create one brand new one to start with. I'll just call this horizontal trace matrix, because there are two main types of traceability matrix, the horizontal and the intersection. So in the horizontal traceability matrix, you basically define the scope of what work items you're interested in, and then you can choose different levels of work items. So if I did epic, features, user stories, and by the way, in this case, I'm using an Agile-based process template, but you can use whatever process template you like. Your work items will show up in the drop-downs. So let's just leave it at that. And then when I go to the Trace Matrix tab, you'll see your horizontal matrix show up. Okay. And we'll go into the details of these trace matrices later on. The other type of trace matrix is called the intersection matrix. And so I'll call it ITM. And in the intersection matrix, you basically give it two dimensions. Again, this is for scoping. You choose the work item types and you give it two dimensions. So let's say I give it user story versus test cases. So this would be your sort of your classical test coverage report. Yeah. So you get your intersection matrix. Okay. Now let's. So these are the two sort of categories or types of traceability matrix. But let's start with this one that I've already configured. This is, I call it the value chain and quality matrix. And in this particular trace matrix, I'll collapse the left side. In this particular one, this is showing how epics are decomposed into features, features into stories, how stories are linked to test cases and bugs. Okay. Now, the way you configure this is what we just saw a minute ago, is through the editor tab. Here you define the scope. So if I just wanted work items that belong to a given iteration, then I could just say equals to 2. Or if I want everything under my current project, I'll pick the root item. And similarly, you can do it with area paths. And then you have up to 10 levels you can add. So right now I have 3 levels. And I'm telling the trace matrix, sorry, 5 levels. I'm telling the trace matrix that when I go from epic down to feature, I'm only interested in the parent-child relationship. Of course, the epic is the parent and the feature is the child. And the user story is the child. And the test case, I'm only considering tested by link types. But for bugs, I've selected any. So the bug could be linked with a related link type or any other link type that you've selected. Okay. So all of this is configurable. And so what it will do, it'll find the epic that meets this criteria, all the epics, and then we'll say, how many child features does it have? And then it'll continue to apply that logic to it. You can also specify that, say, for example, for stories, I want to include priority here. And so I can add properties that I want to see in my trace matrix. Okay. So I can do that, and that's how you configure your basic horizontal matrix. Now there are other variations to it, and I'll cover that shortly. So once you've set it up, you basically save it, and then under here, if you go to the trace matrix column, you will then see, you can see priority got added to this because I just inserted the priority column to it. Now you can nicely see how epics to features to stories, that's your value chain. And then from there, you get into what are the test cases against every story and what are the related bugs against them. Now, one of the things you might do is you might turn off the merge, you might turn on the merge view. And what that does, and that does something very interesting. So for example, if I scroll down here, okay, you will see that I actually had created bugs against my user stories. So this would be a case where you're trying to specify requirements bugs versus implementation bugs. Okay. So if you do track that, some people do, others don't. But what this is illustrating is that in the non-merge view, you would see that this area is blank, and then the bug would be in the next column. But in this case, we just pull it in. So it's right next to it. Okay, so merge view is quite useful because you don't want to sort of see white spaces and then follow to the linked work items. Oh yeah, you know what? There's one more thing I had done. So if I go to merge view again, what we were looking at was one is the bugs. The other is you can see that test cases linked to the feature here. Okay, so again, this showed up alongside. So if you do have macro level test cases that you're linking to a feature or an epic or whatever other work items, then the merge view makes it much more readable, if you will, right? So merge view is a pretty useful function. The other thing you can do is you can save this to Excel. So an Excel save is simply a WYSIWYG output. So if I do this, it will generate an Excel document. So yes, allow please. And then I'll just open that up, and it's really a WYSIWYG output to what we were seeing on the screen. So this is the output, right? So we do need to share it with people. That's probably a good view to share with people. Now, the other thing to note is you can also generate a smart report. And smart report is really interesting because what smart report gives you is the ability to generate a document based on this structure. So if you use smart reporting, say through a query view, what you will note is that in queries, you can create a direct links query, which is sort of, you can say, give me user stories to test cases. So if you did user stories to test cases, it would sort of give you this result. And if you did parent-child, for the first 3 levels, then you can't get the test cases. And nor can you get the related bugs in a query. So this becomes a really interesting way of pulling this data and then generating a smart report, because smart report from here would really be, would consider this matrix to be a hierarchy. Okay, so you get a hierarchy. So this becomes a virtual hierarchy on which a smart report can be produced. Okay. And I won't get into smart reporting as yet. There is under a help center that there are lots of videos on smart reporting. But I think our next webinar is going to be a deep dive on reporting. But you can generate smart reports from here. The one thing to note for all modern requirements capabilities, there is the Discover panel. So in the Discover panel, you can, in this case, find various how-tos. So these are sort of most frequently asked for how-tos that you can access from here. And then you can click on Get Started. It will take you to the videos for traceability matrices, go to online help, and so on. So now let's take a look at a few variations of this traceability matrix, of the horizontal matrix. So one of the variations we have is, let's take a look at this one. Okay, so in this particular case, this is again a horizontal matrix. What I'm showing is, I'm showing user stories that are in the active state. Then the user stories are linked to test cases, which are in ready state, and bugs that are in new state. So how do you configure this? Okay. So what you do is you go to the editor view, and in the editor view, you actually will choose the multi-query option. So the multi-query option basically is going to let you add multiple queries. So in this case, I said I want active stories. Here I said I want ready test cases, and here I said I want open bugs. But I also specified that whatever work items come from this query, well, this will certainly show up in my first column in my trace matrix. But then I will look for all test cases that are part of this test query that is linked to these user stories with the tested by link type. And then from here, I look for all bugs that are returned by this query that are linked to the test cases with the related link type. So you can imagine it gives you a lot of control as to what information you want to show possibly in each column. So if we go to our query view, and so you can see here I have active user stories. So if I go in there, I've created a query here, and the query simply says, give me user stories that are active. But I could have added a whole bunch of other conditions to be very particular as to what work items I'm interested in for this query. And similarly for each one of these. Because in the original instance, when we were looking at the work item type option, the filtering was only based on area path and iteration path. I couldn't put conditions on the work item types. So if you do want to put in conditions, one of the ways to do that is to use the multi-query option. Right? And then based on this, of course, and you can again do the same thing where you can choose your properties you want to see in the system, in the trace matrix, that is, and then you can generate it, and you'll get this type of a report. The third variation that I want to talk about is cross-project queries. So if you look at this particular one, I'm going to go to the editor tab. Okay, so in this case, you'll see I've selected the second option. And the second option, what you do is you provide one query. So only the work items that are part of this query will be considered in this trace matrix. So this defines the scope, the overall scope. And then you can define your epic. I want epic. I want any related features to it. And if you look at that query, which query was it? Cross-project epic. So cross-project epic. So the result of this is a bunch of epics and features. But here, I'm saying that, firstly, I'm saying that I want to consider only work items in these two projects. Although I could have done all projects query through checking this, but I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to select my work items from these two projects. And then I'm saying that the work item type should be epic or feature, and then it gave me this list. And I just did a flat list. So these are only the work items that are going to be considered in that traceability matrix. But I could have said, so for example, I could have said that I don't want features that are in some iteration or in some state or whatever the case is. So I can add many more conditions to this to fine-tune the work items that should be considered in this traceability matrix, right? So this is the master query list that we will consider. And then I will take the epics and the linked features with whatever link type it may be linked with, and based on that, we'll produce the report. So you can, in this way, pull data in from multiple projects and so on and so forth. The other type of, the other variations, actually, no, let me show you one other thing here. One of the other traceability matrix configuration you have is to show test results. So let me just pull this in. And what you can do is you can actually show test results in your horizontal matrix. So if you see here, I'm showing test results in the traceability matrix. Okay. And the way you show this is through the editor tab. And in the editor tab, what I did was I went to test case, column options, test results. So what's interesting about the test result is the following. So the test result is actually not a property of the test case work item. Okay. It is actually stored in the test database of Azure DevOps. So how did we show this property here when it is not a property? Well, what we did was we created what we are calling a virtual property. And this virtual property, when you select it and the system has to show the test results, it actually goes and peeks into the test database and pulls the result out and shows the result. Okay, so we've done some magic there to create this virtual property that you can now see your results in the horizontal matrix. So that's one thing you can do, is see test results. And later on, when I cover intersection matrix, I'll show you what test results look like in there as well. By the way, test results can also be shown in reporting. So if you want to generate a document with all your test results, you could. But we'll cover that in the next deep dive webinar. So let's now transition to the intersection matrix. So one of the most popular intersection matrix is the user story to test case intersection matrix. And in this particular test matrix, you define two dimensions. So let's take a look at how you define it first. So when you create a new traceability matrix, choose the intersection one if that's the one you want. You define the scope. Again, this is a simpler one. There is a more complex one that we'll look at later. So this is the work item type. You define the scope. You determine which link types are you interested in. So if these two work items or work item collections are linked with whatever you've selected it here, then those will show up as linked. Otherwise, those links would be ignored. And then, of course, you just choose the two work item types here. So this is sort of the fastest way to create a trace matrix. And once you've configured this, all you do is save it and run it. And then it'll basically generate the trace matrix for you. Every time you run the trace matrix, it actually gets the data from Azure DevOps at runtime. So it's always current. So if you go and select on any trace matrix, you'll see the current traceability as to how things are. So in here, what it's showing is I have these various user stories in my rows. And in my columns, I have my test cases. Everywhere you see an arrow here, that means the user story and test cases are linked. So these are two linked. Okay. And so the way to read it is the user story is tested by the test case. Okay. This particular user story has 5 test cases against it. Right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's one down further. Right? So there are 5 test cases against this particular requirement. Of course, if it says 0 here, that means this user story does not have any test case against it. So the reverse is true as well. So you can see this test case has 2 user stories against it. So this covers 2 user stories. So this you not only can you visualize like this, but you can even go and you can say, okay, you know what, just give me work items that have no link so I can find my suspects. So all of these user stories have no test cases. Whereas these test cases seem to exist for their own sake. So they are not linked to any requirements. And so all of these user stories and test cases are suspects. So this might be a good place to look at why either the test case is not available for the user story, or why do test cases exist when they have no underlying requirement that they're trying to test for. The other thing you can do in the trace matrix is you can make links. So let's say I determine for this user story, this particular test case should be, that they should be connected. So this is 0, and that's not true. This is the one that applies to it. So I'll just click on the plus sign, choose my link type, add a comment if I want to, and click on OK, and the link is created. Now this has 1 in the coverage, and so does that now have 1 in the coverage. Okay. So in this case, in this way, you can create links very efficiently. Now, if you remember in ADO, to create a link, you have to open up a work item, click on create link to existing work item, find the work item, give it a name, select the link type, click OK, and then you're done. So it's like 8 steps to create that link. This way you can do it very efficiently, right? So if I did want to create another link, I'll just click on this. It knows I want to do a tested by because that's what I did last time for this matrix, and the link is created, right? So it's very efficient to make and break links, and to visualize links, and to have different views. And the fact is that because you can create these traceability matrices so quickly, you can create different slices, you can slice it and dice it in many different ways to identify, do different types of analysis and gain insight on your project. Of course, if you do it manually, you probably just do 1 type or 2 type, and that's all you will do. But when you can automate it, you have the luxury of creating 10 different variations because it'll tell you something about your project. The other thing you can do in here, you can export this to Excel. So similar to the horizontal export, it's essentially a WYSIWYG export. And there is the Discover panel in there as well. The other thing you can do in here is when you do have test cases in here, you could also choose to show test results. Now you will see there is no properties thing here because there's no way to show property in a little cell like this, right? So what we did was we actually created the ability to configure for you to choose the configuration of your test suite. So if I choose system A, so that's the configuration, then it'll tell me this passed, this failed, this is unblocked, and so on and so forth. Now, how does this test results work? So in the Microsoft Azure DevOps test area, one of the type of test case you have is called requirements-based test suite. And in there, you're testing for a given requirement, you'll test all the test cases that applies to the requirement, and the result really applies to that particular requirement. So you can see this particular test case was executed for this, and it passed. And this one, which is the same test case, but for this requirement, it failed. And for this requirement, it passed as well, right? So this type of testing is really requirement-centric, as opposed to in other cases where you're just saying, okay, I'm going to test this, I'm going to run this test case, and if it passes, then all the requirements that are linked to it have also therefore passed. Okay, so that's sort of the first approach. This is the requirements-based test suite approach, and so the intersection matrix will show you the result based on the configuration that you're running your requirements-based test suite as an overlay. Okay. So it'll show you as an overlay. Now, of course, if you want to go back to your original state, you can also, by the way, run an overlay for all your configuration, or you can just select the blank one. It'll go back to how it was to begin with. Now, one of the things that I should mention that that our clients have been asking us is, so when we show people that you can do, you can show test results, and the test results really are not work items, and that we created this virtual property. So many of our clients, and perhaps many of you, have asked us that why don't you do a test reporting for things like from test plan to test suite to test case to test run to test steps and results of the step and so on. But you may know that Microsoft doesn't create links between many of those that information. So a test plan is not linked to a test suite, although it visually shows it because it's in the test database, or a test suite is not linked to a test case. Again, it visually will show it in the test hub, but it does not create a link. And beyond that, test run is not even a work item. And there's a bunch of information in the test area that are not work items, or things are not linked together at the work item level. So what we have been working on is to create virtual links, virtual entities, and virtual properties, so that you can use, for example, the horizontal matrix to say, give me my trace matrix from test plan to test suite to test case to test run to test step, and so on and so forth, right? So we are implementing a full sort of framework for virtualization of information that is in Azure DevOps that are actually not real work items. And so we're very excited about this. This is going to be out in our vNext, which is probably sometime, hopefully in August. August is our target, end of August. So we'll get that to you guys. And then you can start using the testing aspect or reporting based on the test hub within Azure DevOps. So let's take a look at another variation. So here is user stories to bugs. This is the scenario where I was describing earlier, that you could actually be tracking bugs against your requirements. So if you're tracking that, this might be useful for you to have, right? This requirement had 2 requirements defect, or this one had 3. Well, who wrote this? Who gave us the requirement? And why did we end up with that? So we can actually do some introspection and fix the underlying problem, because requirements-based bugs are the worst, right? Because its implications are very big. Because if you give the wrong requirements, and of course, in the end, you'll get systems that don't do what they're supposed to do, and so you want to catch them and learn from it. So this is an interesting view if you do track bugs against your requirements or stories. By the way, I use the word requirements generically, so you could be using product backlog items or functional requirements or user stories. It doesn't matter. The other one is, which one is this? User story to test case to bug. So this is probably, no, this is a horizontal matrix that we have seen already. So that's that. So folks, what I want to next talk about is, in your traceability matrix for test case to bugs. So this is just saying these are my test cases, here are my bugs, and how they are linked together. And this test case has 4 bugs against it. So why did this happen, right? So if you look at this, first you can know the state of your project, right? So this is where things are. This has 4 bugs. So was this requirement that is underlying the test case very complex, or how can we sort of find better ways to doing things? So the insight you can get out of trace matrix is really quite fantastic. You just have to think about it and then come up with how do you make it actionable, right? but knowledge is the foundation of it, and this provides that to you. If I go to this view, again, all I did was test case to bugs. I chose any link type against it, right? So in this particular case, I did feature to test case, and feature to test case is, since I had high-level test cases, I actually wanted to see which of my features actually have test cases and which ones don't, because you may not have macro level. Most people do test cases at the user story level, but you may choose to do it at a higher level, like an integration test case, if you will, right? So this becomes quite useful that way. What other ones did I have? I had one other one. So we did the cross project, we did the story thing, we did test case to bug, test user story, test case to horizontal, that is, user story to bug, user story to test case. Yeah, no, I think we did all of these, right? So folks, so that's how the trace matrix works. The one thing I will mention that Ambreen had mentioned earlier on, and so if you look at on our website, you will find that under Help Center, we have various types of content. So for example, this requirements traceability matrix is in our bootcamp 2. It's a short video. If you need more information, then you can come to the tutorial page, and there are several videos under this. And if you need more information, then come to our deep dive webinar series, where each of our deep dive webinars are getting posted, and we'll be adding one more, which is this webinar. So the Help Center is a great resource that's available to you anytime you need it. So with that, what we'll do is we'll open it up for Q&A and answer your questions. Bob?
Okay, so we have a few questions that people have submitted. Jeffrey asks, is there a way to change the color scheme of the columns for the horizontal matrix? The color scheme seems to differ from the colors of our work items.
Yeah, so not right now. That is something we do have in our backlog to inherit that color scheme. So right now that is not possible, but we will get it done soon.
And Wendy asks, what are the blue dots signify?
That's the state. That's the state color. That's the state of the work item. So I think blue is like active or something. Yeah, and if you turn it off, then those goes away if it's distracting.
And Jeffrey asks, is there a way to create a URL link to the work item from the horizontal trace matrix?
Yeah, so if you did want to open up, if that's what you mean, how do I open it up? Then you just hover over it, it'll give you a flyover, and then you can just click on edit, and which will open up the work item editor. So you can go to either the rows, the columns, or in the also in the horizontal matrix, if you hover over the name or the cell, it'll give you this flyover.
Then there was another question asking what requirements tool are we showing here? I guess this person missed the beginning introduction. And The tool is Modern Requirements for DevOps. And this is the trace analysis module from within Modern Requirements for DevOps. There is another question. Can we sort based on some criteria like bug count or bug priority, etc.? Prasad is asking that.
What you can't do it right now. One of the things that that we are implementing is that when you are using a query-based approach, right now we just do it based on the ID, I think. So it's in ascending order. One of the things we are implementing is that when you do a query-based, reporting, so you use either this or you use one of these two, the order of the query result would be retained. And thereby, you can then go and define your order in the query, and the results would then be sorted. Because we did get that request, so instead of implementing ourselves, we are just going to leverage the functionality that's already there in the query, but just make sure that the order is the same in Traceability.
Ian asks, all data is stored in the cloud, correct? What kind of security of the data is involved?
Yeah, all the work items are stored in Azure DevOps. And so this data is accessed by Modern Requirements through your credential through single sign-on. So when you log in, Modern Requirements automatically sort of you have a single sign-in experience with Modern Requirements, and your data is acquired through Azure DevOps, and the data is only used in transient. That is, the data is never stored. And so once the data is rendered and you go away, close it, whatever, the data is not retained. So the whole security premise is that the system of record is Azure DevOps. And obviously, Microsoft does a very good job of data security.
The next question from Geeta is a great question. Do we have portfolio level traceability?
Yes. So when you create your hierarchy, so if you look at this particular traceability matrix, the value chain that we're looking at here is from epic features to stories. So at the portfolio level, you would have one or two levels above the epic, right? So you may have a portfolio work item, a stream work item, and then an epic, and so on and so forth. So it just depends on how you have configured the system. You would end up having a portfolio level traceability.
Next question is, what editions of Modern Requirements is the trace analysis available in? And the answer is all editions. The 4 editions, Agile, Compliance, Enterprise, and Enterprise Plus, all include the trace analysis capability. And if you're thinking of a business case, for the people that said they spend at least 5 hours to create traceability matrices per project, and that was a very significant majority, you can justify and pay for the trace analysis capability in the Agile module for as little as $650 a year in one project. So if you're spending 5 to 10 hours, look at fully loaded cost, that certainly justifies the Agile edition just on the trace analysis capability. And the last question is, can stakeholders using a free license create or view trace analysis?
And the answer to that is no. So stakeholders cannot view trace matrix. They would have to, if you want to share it with them, you can export it to Excel, as we've given the function to do that, and then share it with them. So two of our modules that stakeholders cannot execute at all is the baseline and the trace analysis. I think all other places they can at least view the information, like smart docs. Your stakeholder can view a smart doc, but the trace analysis cannot be viewed by a stakeholder. Yeah, they would need a license.
Here's an interesting question from Jeffrey. Can you import or update a trace matrix from the Excel export?
No. Yeah, that's an interesting requirement. I mean, it's an interesting idea that I mean, I can kind of imagine we could implement that for things like intersection matrix, or even for horizontal matrix, where we could have these things updated. But the answer is today you cannot. We would obviously have to do. There's probably, I can imagine, a bunch of different conditions as to how we want to handle it. But today you cannot. The trace matrix has to be this export, both for Smart Report and Excel, are just an output.
And then Owen asks, can you import requirements from a spreadsheet?
Yes. And in fact, for this webinar, one of the things I did was to create data in an Excel sheet because I just wanted simple numbering to show where the data was coming from and all that. And so I actually created it and then published it. So yes, you can bring data in from Excel using the team extension to Excel.
And then Laurent asks, is there any limitation in number of requirements? I have in mind a project with more than 40,000 requirements.
So 40,000 requirement is probably too many requirements for any traceability matrix. I think Excel would probably crash by then also. But if you did have, say, 10,000 by 5,000 matrix, the system will do well. I believe we have tested up to 20,000 by 10,000 matrices, and so it goes pretty high number. But of course, if you had that big a trace matrix, then what would you do with it? It'd be so massive, right? So ideally, you want to make even 20,000 by 10,000. What that we do support. How do you use it effectively, right? So you probably want to figure out other ways of slicing and dicing that information. So you have smaller trace matrix, maybe a few thousand by a few thousand, or a few hundred by a few hundred would be preferable. But from a systems point of view, you can do very large matrices.
And then I guess Laurent's adding, of course, it is organized in, let's say, 60 components. So that could do some sense.
Yeah, so in that case, you'd end up with, so for every component, you had, say, 40,000 requirements. So you'd have 1,000 or less per component on average. That obviously is not an issue from a size perspective, and it's probably also digestible for somebody working on such a matrix.
I think that is all of the questions that we have. We've reached the top of the hour. Any last questions that people want to enter into the question panel? If not, I will turn it over to Asif to wrap up.
All right, thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone. Very happy to see so many of you on this webinar. If you do have specific questions on traceability matrix that did not get answered today, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to answer those or set up a call to go through your scenario. And yeah, and join us for the next webinar on smart reporting and advanced reporting, where we'll look at various permutations and ways of creating reports and exporting them to Word or PDF. And yeah, so we'll do smart report and the advanced report. We'll be doing both of them together. Folks, stay safe and have a wonderful day. Peace.